this afternoon, unions lampooned the Chancellor, they slightly would, wouldn't they, after he made, quote, no effort, unquote, to address higher pay for the public sector in his budget speech. 500,000 workers went on strike today. Many picketed, some probably outside their own living rooms, but some outside government offices, hospitals, train stations and schools to demand higher pay and better working conditions. Mr Hunt has found money to freeze draft duty on beer, petrol duty and sort out pensions. Has he betrayed the public sector? Well, I'm going to turn to my panel on this. As before, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, I'm going to give you the first go on this because you're representing the opposition, the Labour Party's close to the unions. Do you think it was a betrayal?
Well, betrayal is not the word that I would necessarily use, but clearly, if he wants to stop the disputes, if he wants to deal with the cost of living crisis, if he wants to deal with the pay settlements, all of which he said he wanted to in the rhetoric of the speech, but then proposed no methods to actually do that. And we know from all the economic forecasts that inflation is not being led or driven by pay rises, and there is not a real danger of that happening. It is a commodity-led inflation crisis, and actually a pay increase will see potentially more money in our economy, not less.
But do you think it's right for people like school teachers to go on strike, particularly when children suffered so much during the pandemic when they were kept at home for months on end? Doesn't it seem deeply selfish?
I think it's a right for almost all workers to go on strike, except maybe some very small exceptions where you're dealing with absolute public safety, you know, kind of police officers and prison officers clearly are slightly exceptional. I do think that where you are dealing with people who you're having to care for, as we know in the health service, it is right that the unions sit down and work out a way that emergency care is always covered, and they do that by negotiation. But I think it is a right that people can say, I do not want, we don't live in slave labour, I do not want to give my labour to you unless I can negotiate better terms and conditions. Unless I can get better terms and conditions, I'm effectively walking. The problem is if you run an economy where everyone just walks and gets a job, it actually creates instability. So it's better to be able to do that on a collective basis where then you sit down and negotiate. And the unions have done that very effectively with the private sector. If you look at the car manufacturing sector in this country, Unite, the union, has been very good at sitting down and working out productivity deals that help win-win on all sides. The problem is, I'm afraid, your government, Jacob, is...
His Majesty's government, but leaving that to one side.
The government that you helped to prop up, and I do everything to get rid of, I think is taking too much of an ideological point of view, not trying to sit down and work out a deal for the workers. Bearing in mind, in the private sector, the average pay increase over the last 10 years has been 1.6%, whereas the average pay increase for, say, a teacher or a junior doctor has been almost minus 10 to 15%.
Kelvin, you were once the scourge of the unions.
I hope I still am, yeah.
You still are. Do you think the government's betrayed the public sector?
One of the few things that I've admired this government for, and sooner, is actually standing up to these bullies. These are people who can cause you a lot of personal pain. The BMA's reaction to this, in the way that they have deliberately not told hospitals who's going out and what's going to do, and offered any assistance at all. At least the ambulance people did deals on a local basis. These guys are saying go through the national. You know, the idea. Pick out the phone. Ridiculous and disgraceful. But look, at the end of the day, everybody is going to have to take pain. Why the public sector think that they can have less pain. Now, I admire a union that you're connected with, which is the Fire Brigade Union, right, who did a deal, backdated 7% to last July and 5% from the summer, OK? It's less than inflation. Yes. Well, actually, we learned today that inflation at the end of the year is going to be 2.9%. So why on earth don't these people say, we will do what the FBU are doing, right? It's beyond me. And I hate what they're doing. What the RMT are doing to the southeast, they're probably enjoying it, I don't know. They must have cost their employees, the employees of the RMT, thousands of pounds now. What have they achieved? People are working from home, and actually more of them now.
Not RMT stuff, but the FBU example is a good example, because the Fire Brigade is one of the few compulsorily negotiated wage boards that we have left in this country. I think it is the only nationwide one that we have left in the public sector, where the employers and the unions, they don't have a pay review board, they sit down and negotiate every year. And that, I think, ends up meaning you have less industrial action. You have sometimes threats of it, of course, because they sit down and they understand to thrash out a deal. In all the others, it's been taken out of the hands of union leaders and politicians to these pay review boards, and what has built up is a huge level of back pay in these sectors where they've not been paid fairly compared to the private sector.
But how
and now, of course, we have this crisis.
Well, why don't they say, look, why don't they just have the back channels? I mean, all these organisations have back channels and simply say, look, if you offer us the FBU deal, we'll take that.
Well, in Wales, the strikes have been suspended in certain sectors because the government has done that. But this government has not refused to do that.
But the pay review boards were brought in because of the strikes in the 80s in essential services, because it was seen as a fair way of doing it, and that there would be an independent body that would give recommendations.
No, the removal of properly nationally negotiated terms and conditions is something that has been happening over the last 15 years. And it has reduced the ability. There's nothing wrong with having a recommendation, but it's reduced the ability to negotiate.
These are politically motivated strikes. Nobody can tell me that the RMT wouldn't take the money, but they don't want to lose the employees. What right has a union to say, we aren't going to do this?
But
We're not going to do that?
In Wales, they've managed to do a deal, including some changes of work patterns, because they were able to sit down with a reasonable government.
But Lynch and Co are actually Marxists disguised as extreme socialists.
But they're destroying the railways anyway, aren't they? That, as Kelvin was saying, if you weren't working from home already, you'll work from home now if you can't possibly commute.
They're not destroying us, are they, honestly, in the way that they hoped they would?
Railway usage will change. It will change to be more of a leisure service. It will change to actually... And we see this already, particularly on the Brighton line, where it's sometimes more crowded on the weekends than it is on commuter times.
You won't get it this Saturday because they're on strike.
Yes, well, the thing is, sometimes we get a better service when they're on strike than when they're actually working.
We'll have to have another discussion on the future of the railways, and we'll have to talk about HS2 and whether that's good value for money with all the billions, 100 billion that may be going into that.